Hey, welcome back to the Personality Hacker Podcast. My name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
Today we are continuing our series where we deep dive into every one of the Myers-Briggs personality types. And today we're talking about the ENTP in the Myers-Briggs system, which in our Genius system, in the Personality Hacker system, is the exploration accuracy personality.
Yeah, I have a question for you, Joel.
Yes.
When we did ENFP, why weren't you as intimidated by doing the ENFP podcast as I am by doing the ENTP podcast?
Because you are an ENTP and you know other ENTPs that are listening are more, they're going to be focused on that accuracy process. They're going to pinpoint you on every little tiny nuance that you say. Or ENFPs are more like, yeah, I get the gist of what you're saying. I get it. I resonate with that. I can get that. They're not as persnickety in my mind.
Do you think so? I actually don't think ENTPs are persnickety.
Well, they're persnickety on data. I think they're persnickety on like the specifics of what you say, especially if they know. Especially if you're an ENTP who understands Myers-Briggs and you've been around the community, you understand cognitive functions, you understand how things work. I think you're looking for new insight, and you know this is an ENTP. You know that the ENTP listening is looking for new connections, and so they're going to be watching for all the accurate pieces you're bringing to the table, we're bringing to the table. And anything that's out of line, they might be, like if you're trying to get the gist of something and you don't say it in a particular way, I think they might latch onto that because they're really trying to find the leverage point of insight here. This is what my perspective is. I have no clue. I'm pulling this out of my butt completely. I do not know this to be true, but this is my speculation of why you're more insecure, more nervous about it than I am on the ENFP side.
Yeah, I hadn't consciously thought of all of or any of that.
I just thought of it just now.
So, I mean, you've just added more. Actually, I think we're going to be okay on that. I think we might be okay on that piece.
I think so too.
Yeah. I think I'm nervous because I am an ENTP. And clean data is really important to me. And my biggest fear is that I'm going to be superimposing my image of myself onto the type. Like last week when we did ENTJs, I was so scared that I was going to superimpose the image of my brother, who was a very influential person in my life, onto my concept of ENTJs.
Yeah.
And now I'm really worried that I'm going to do the same thing with myself and ENTPs in particular because I am an ENTP. Like this is my entire experience. And so it's become very difficult to fillet out the difference or the differences between ENTP Antonia Dodge and ENTP and everybody else. Like what if one of the things that I'm talking about has nothing to do with type and has everything to do with just me?
Well, that's why you have a brilliant and handsome man across from you that can help, deal with this.
That is true. And also, we were smart and sent out a survey. And so...
I like my first answer better.
Well, your first answer is very relevant. And I like your first answer better, too. But we sent out a survey to ENTPs, and what we got back was really intriguing to me. I actually think that I ate up the answers for ENTP faster, or the ENTP survey answers much faster than I did any of the other types. Like I just consume them so quickly. And that's what we do, right? Like if it's our type, we have type patriotism. It's super fascinating to us. So that's, we all just, if we have a book on type, we immediately flip to the chapter on our type.
Yeah.
And so I just ate them up. And there were a couple of things that I noticed were not issues I dealt with anymore that seemed to be issues that are very common to other people of the type. And then there were other things that people said that I was like, that is so dead on. That is exactly what I'm experiencing. So I've been nervous about this podcast. And at the same time, I'm actually really glad to be doing it. I'm so grateful to be able to get to know fellow ENTPs and the things that they're struggling with, the challenges they're facing, and the ways that they see themselves, and to be able to really understand that there is a sense of simpatico here. And then on the other side, that I've been able to figure some stuff out that I'm really grateful to be able to share with other people of my type. So I was really nervous about this one, but I don't think I'm as nervous now. Those surveys really helped me out a lot, and I think I'm excited. I think I'm ready to go.
Cool. Well, let's dig right in here. Let's start talking about, we're going to talk about some of the survey results, but let's just frame out for you, if you're a new listener, if you're an ENTP listening, we want to talk about the wiring of your mind really quickly and just illustrate to you how your mind is learning information and making decisions. A lot of times when we're talking about personality type or you're reading it online, people are talking about behaviors, they're talking about tendencies, they're talking about those four dichotomies, that ENTP. And they don't really dig into what those mean. Those are really designed to be a decoder ring for how your mind is wired, how you're learning information, how you make decisions. As an ENTP, we have a car model we use. if you go to our website, you can Google search car model on our website, and you can get an article that will illustrate this for you visually. But we use a car model, and we use this car model to illustrate where the mental processes in your mind sit in a vehicle, like a car illustration. For you as an ENTP, your primary mental process, the technical name is a cognitive function, is called extroverted intuition. That's its technical name. We've nicknamed it exploration. And it's a learning process. It's a perceiving process. It's how you learn and move through the world and perceive the world that you're in as an ENTP. It's all about finding connections between disparate things in the outside world by messing with them, by pushing the buttons, by messing with people, by figuring out patterns and connections in the outside world, by manipulating things and seeing, okay, I see this is connected to this is a connection here, and the patterns start to emerge in the outside world externally when you move through perceiving the world this way.
Yeah, we decided to call it exploration because people who use this type, this is a flow state for them. And they get into flow when they are making connections between things that other people believe are disparate. And so novelty becomes very important to them. It's all about exploring new territories, finding out and discovering things that nobody else has discovered before. That's very satisfying to people who lead with this process. So exploration, we believe, is aptly named because it is about exploring. We oftentimes say it's like 6 foot tall grass and you've got a machete in your hand and you are there to blaze a trail. It's very much about what if possibilities thinking. And it really is advanced pattern recognition. So you end up seeing things that other people miss, and you end up making connections that other people would never have thought to make.
Yeah, and if you are an ENTP and you lead with this process, this is a flow state for you. You've been using this exploration your whole life. You probably have a lot of things that catch your fancy, catch your attention. You like to do new and novel things. And my guess is that because of this process, the rote, the mundane, the just the basic going through the grind of life can get very boring very quickly for you. It's tough to sustain things that require lots of paperwork and triplicate forms and all this like basic stuff that we have to deal with in life, right? The infrastructure of life that we have to deal with. ENTPs are excited about finding the possibilities, like Antonia just said. They're excited about finding, and I know that, Antonia, when you show up somewhere, you often you'll break systems on purpose, not break them, but you'll mess with them on purpose to see how they can be entertaining or how you can find a new pattern in something that's like tried and true. Reinventing the wheel is something that ENTPs love to do. Metaphorically speaking, it's something that they will do over and over again to find the patterns in how things are done in the world and see if they can find ways to do them better. They're really interested in optimizing things for the better.
Yeah, it's a very it's an optimistic process, exploration is. And one of the things that came out in the survey over and over again was this concept of getting bored easily. And I don't even think it's necessarily, yes, you're right. Absolutely, it is when you have to deal with anything in triplicate form. Like the phrase triplicate form will make me break out in hives when I just think about it. So absolutely, that is a piece of it. But I don't even think it's necessarily things that are so infrastructural. I think it's also anytime you think you figured out something, you're ready to move on to the next thing. And so what ends up happening is that everything requires, like, in order to actually produce something, in order to get return on investment, you have to follow something through to the end. And a major issue that a lot of ENTPs deal with is that they get about 80% of the way through with a project and they're out because 80% was a struggle for them to get to. Like, it wasn't like they got to 80% and got bored. They probably got bored at like 40% and they pushed themselves to get to 80% and then they were just done and could not stand it anymore. So that last 20% there was just no way that they were going to be able to get to it. And unfortunately, that means that it's not uncommon for other people to finish an ENTP's project for them, and then that other person gets to get the return on investment. They get to get the rewards. And so a lot of ENTPs find themselves jumping from project to project and never actually making any traction. They might not get the amount of money that they deserve with the work that they put into a project up front if they haven't set up conditions where that was part of the agreement, which is that I'll help set you up and then I go and you finish it up and then I get a percentage. So if they haven't had enough self-awareness around this, if they haven't been able to build systems that account for this, knowledge of themselves that they're going to get bored and have to move on, then a lot of times they feel like they just can't make any traction in life. They cannot figure out what they're supposed to be doing. They can't choose one thing to do. They can't figure out a direction in life, and that can get really frustrating.
Well, and the challenge too is, and you've used this illustration, other things we've taught and talked about. When an ENTP comes into a new situation, it's exciting to learn about it. It's exciting to master that new situation, that new tool, that new job. Let's say you're hired on as an ENTP in a new job role, something you've not done before. The first 6 months is exciting because you're learning new things. You're becoming competent at your job. You're outperforming the others around you. And you're looked at as, wow, this person, this ENTP has it together. They are on the stick. They are organized. They're competent. They're just mastering their craft. And about the 6-month mark, and you've seen this in your jobs, right, Antonia? Like, that you've had in the past, the 6-month mark comes and you're like, I'm really getting bored now. I've mastered everything I can master here. I don't see much more progression of what I can learn, and I'm going to just start dialing it in. And so what happens is you get excited and you impress the people around you, but for you, it's like, this just isn't the thing I want to be doing anymore, and you start to lose interest very quick.
Yeah, you go from rising star to C player really quick. Sometimes D player. Like, you're just... if I've had a job, and I don't mean like a career or owned a business and been entrepreneurial or like my current passion, right? I actually don't feel like I'm in a passion position right now. I feel like I'm on purpose, which is really satisfying. I highly recommend it to anybody, especially ENTPs, since we're talking about them right now. But when I just had jobs and I just got like hired by people, it didn't matter how mundane the job was. I was pretty excited at first to figure out at least how it worked and operated in that particular office or that particular context or situation. It was interesting to me until I figured it out. And I frequently was looked at as a rising star. And then that moment would hit where I'd be like, yeah, I think I've pretty much figured out this. I mean, maybe I haven't like perfectly mastered every component to it, but I pretty much figured out how it works. And instantly, like, I'm like, oh, I can't get up for work in the morning, or get up in the morning to get to work. Like, that just sounds like the worst thing in the world to me because there's nothing exciting or new. And I run on that. I run on novelty. I run on something that's exciting and new. And I think that is very common theme for ENTPs. So I would say that a major struggle that ENTPs face is this idea of, how do I stick with something that is boring me to tears? How do I stick with something that I've just stopped making love to it? I was making love to it when I was figuring it out. It was an idea that I thought was wonderful. It was a concept that I thought was wonderful, a project or whatever, and I'm just done making love to it, and I'm ready to hit the next mistress, the next project mistress, or whatever you want to call it. And one of the things that hasn't super resonated with me in a long time was this concept of boredom. I saw that come up in the survey over and over again. I deal with boredom. And I was like, why don't I deal with boredom as much? And I realized it was two things. Number one, I had I don't know what you were going to call it, like the pleasure or displeasure or whatever, of being put in insanely boring contexts my entire life. When I was a kid, I was born into a deeply religious family, and my father was a leader in this particular religious affiliation. And so he had to do a lot of meetings where we basically went to, like these churches. And in the churches, I wasn't really allowed to bring any sort of secular material. So I couldn't bring a book to read or whatever. So I would be sitting there while he was having like a meeting with all these other church leaders. And I would just be sitting there like for hours, like literally hours on end. I would just be sitting there and not knowing what to do, like bored out of my brains as a little kid. And so what I started to do is I began creating games in my brain, like in my head. Like, I knew I couldn't do anything outside. Like, of course I would do the first thing I would do is like explore every square inch of that particular building. But once that had happened, or if it was a building I was already familiar with, I would just start looking for patterns in the outside world. If there was a hung ceiling, I would try to find different textures in the hung ceiling tiles, or I would try to count all of the light bulbs or all of the lights or something, or whatever it was. Try to figure out the different fabrics of the carpet. I know that sounds horrifying, and it truly was, but that was what I was relegated to. I know that's horrifying.
I know. I'm imagining I have done the same thing. I've counted light bulbs in churches before because I've been so bored. I'm just imagining. I'm actually having this memory right now as you're talking about this.
Right, because you had a very similar upbringing.
Yeah.
Right. So like almost exact same, totally different religions, very similar experiences. And if I ran out of those, then I would start simulating, conversations in my head, or I would start, creating puzzles in my brain, or I would do Tetris in my head or something. Like I was required to figure out some sort of interesting outlet. And I found myself in a lot of other boring contexts where I will read literally anything that's near me. I will read shampoo bottles. I'll read anything. Like I have almost memorized the backs of like aerosol cans and sprays, like their warning labels. I almost have that memorized because I've read those so many times, because I will literally pick up anything to read it. And that was how I dealt with boredom. Now, there's two styles of boredom. There's sitting around doing nothing boredom, where you can make up a game. And then there's the kind of boredom that comes with a manual task that requires enough mental real estate so that you can't focus on something else. You can't daydream. You can't focus on something else. You can't turn something into a game. You have to actually be focused on it, but it's super repetitive. And so those are easily the worst. They are the worst of all tasks. And I've recognized that one of the things that I've done in those situations, and I don't do very many of those anymore, I have effectively constructed a life in which I do everything I can to avoid those situations. And that is a major thing that you can do as an ENTP, is you can work really hard to construct a life where you don't have to do that anymore. And it definitely took me 32 years to get there, but I eventually did. But what I do in those situations is, when I have to be there, is I focus on autonomy, mastery, and purpose. Now, Daniel Pink wrote a book called Drive, and he mentioned that people aren't really very motivated by carrots or sticks. Like that is an old style of motivation. What they're more motivated by is autonomy, mastery, and purpose. So I even turn those repetitive tasks into a game of optimization. I make them as high quality as I possibly can. I turn it into a game of speed, or I turn it into a game of quality, or whatever. Like, how can I game the system as much as possible? And that's how I get myself through those situations. And I think one of the reasons why I do that is because I cease to rely on that driver process of exploration, and I start really focusing on my co-pilot process of what's called introverted thinking, or what we call accuracy.
Yeah, this idea of gamifying things, I bet resonates with you as an ENTP if you're listening. You probably have been a gamer, or at least been attracted to games of some sort in your life. Potentially. Some people aren't. But as an ENTP, I would venture to say you're probably attracted to game, because that secondary process, that co-pilot of accuracy, the technical name is introverted thinking, is all about what makes sense in your mind, the logical connections of your mind, the precision and the accuracy, the optimization of your mental processes. And so as you go through the world, and this is a decision-making process, this is how you decide what to do each day, what to do in the world, what to do with the decisions you're faced with. That exploration process is how you learn information, it's how you perceive the world. And then it kicks it over to your accuracy process and says, okay, what are we going to do about this information we have now? And that accuracy process asks the question, well, what makes sense to do? What makes sense to me in my brain to make the decision to do this or not do this? Does this make sense to do this? Does it not make sense to do this? And that's really the criteria, the basic stripped down criteria that accuracy is using to move through the world. And I think that brings with it this idea and this notion of wanting to be precise, wanting to optimize every experience that you're in. And I think this leads to that idea of boredom. If you don't have the ability to optimize and the ability for mastery, purpose, and was the autonomy, thank you. If you don't have the ability for that, I think you feel stuck, and you feel like you're bored out of your mind. Like you want to be able to optimize something. Something that comes up for you a lot is when you sit down with our 3-year-old Piper and she wants to color. She'll open a coloring book and she'll say, okay, Mommy, you color this page and I'll color this page. So you sit down, you're like, okay, I'm going to be mom. I'm going to sit down and color the page. You'll start coloring. This happens to me too, but I think it frustrates you way more than it frustrates me. You'll be coloring on the one page, the right page, for example, and she'll reach over and start, no, and she'll start coloring over top of what you're trying to do. And you're being very precise. You're using your accuracy process. On a very basic level, but you're wanting to color inside the lines. You want to make it beautiful, optimize the way the colors interplay with each other, and you're starting to focus, and you're starting to really get into what you're doing. You're getting into a little bit of a flow state and just coloring with your daughter. But here she comes over and gums up the works by starting to mark over your page. She removes the ability for you to have autonomy, mastery, and purpose over a coloring page. And that sounds ridiculous if you're listening to ENTP. Well, what does it matter about a coloring page? But this extends to you in your job. This extends to you in your relationship. This extends to you in your community and with your friends. If you don't feel like you have autonomy, mastery, and purpose over the things you're doing, that means you can't optimize that experience to the nth degree, to the degree you want to with that accuracy process. And it becomes extremely frustrating for you. And I think that frustration can often show up as boredom. But I bet if you have autonomy, mastery, and purpose as an ENTP, that starts to get less boring for you. It starts to increase the excitement and the engagement you have. And that's why that 6-month job thing too. You're getting to create mastery, autonomy, and purpose when you're learning a new job. At the end of 6 months, you don't have it so much because now it's rote again.
Yeah, I would say that is a fantastic illustration, which is, coloring the strawberry shortcake coloring book. And I'm there like figuring out different color textures, and I'm coloring multiple colors over it. And if she just one little, it could even be in the corner of the page. If she marks it up, even on the corner, I'm done. I'm out. So one of the things I've had to do is be very clear with her. If you want mommy to color, you're not going to touch my page. Like, that's just how it is. And she might feel like, like maybe, I don't know, maybe that sounds like I'm limiting her ability to self-express by coloring over my page. And maybe that's true, but if she wants me coloring with her, those are the parameters. And I think that's something that's really important for an ENTP to recognize, is that if you feel like you're stripped of power to be able to optimize, like Joel just mentioned, if you think that you're on the receive, like somebody's going to come in and muck it up, like you've just done this gorgeous thing. You've just made this beautiful precision, I don't know, process. Or you've taken, maybe you're a graphic artist and like you just made this gorgeous, like piece of art or whatever it is. I don't even know what the context might be for you, but you have made this beautiful work of art and either somebody doesn't appreciate it, which of course will kill you more than anything else. Like lack of appreciation for this amazing optimization is definitely something that hits at the soul of an ENTP. But even if it's not a lack of appreciation, if somebody just comes in and like messes with it, you're out. You're like, I'm done. Nope. You just nope your way out of there. And if you're in a job context where a person keeps doing that to you, that will become just intolerable very quickly. And like you said, Joel, you can apply that to any situation. Any situation in which an ENTP feels disempowered to leave their mark, where they feel disempowered to make something like optimized or achieve something really awesome, it's going to be very frustrating for the ENTP. And I think that's why ENTPs have a tendency to be entrepreneurial, because they recognize this in themselves. They know that they're self-starters at the beginning, and they know they have a tendency to flame out quick. And so that's entrepreneurial, like get it going quickly, like get it going early, get everybody excited about the idea. And then once you do that, then you hand it over to somebody else to finish it up. And also, if you're an entrepreneur, that means that you have full autonomy over how this thing is happening, and you gain mastery along the way, and a bunch of stuff will be thrown at you. And you'll have to figure it out, and it will always be interesting. Even if it's stressful, even if it's high stress, it will always at least be interesting, and you'll be in control of it. And so I think that's why ENTPs, I believe statistically of all the types, are the most likely to become entrepreneurs because of that piece right there. And I do recommend it if you are at all in a context in which you can be entrepreneurial, or even what we call, what is it called? Intrapreneurial?
Yeah.
You want to describe or explain what intrapreneurial is?
It's basically being entrepreneurial inside of a company. So you have space to create and to be creative and create either a business line or some type of a business structure or a product or service inside of the company using their resources. So you don't have to go to a bank and get a loan. The company may own it, but you get to be more creative and you have autonomy, mastery, and purpose over your destiny. And that's really what we're talking about, is whether it's inside a company with that autonomy, mastery, and purpose, or outside of a company as an entrepreneur. It's the intrapreneur or entrepreneur that we're talking about here.
Yeah, and I highly recommend that if you can, go talk to the people. Like if you have a day job, if you basically work for a company, go talk to the people that you work for and say, how do I become entrepreneurial? If you can't have that kind of conversation with the people you work with, that might be a sign in and of itself, honestly. And I mean, here at Personality Hacker, we're trying so hard to empower people to have the life that they want. And so I'm not really okay with ENTPs being stuck in dead-end jobs. And I understand that context dependent, you might feel that you really have no options, but you're an ENTP. If you think you run out of options, you're probably depressed. So keep searching options. Keep looking for ways that you can bring your best gifts forward in that way.
So accuracy is your co-pilot in your car, and we're going to go over to the other backseat functions in a minute, but I want to make a quick note and a quick comment about that accuracy process. One of the things that you can do as an ENTP to improve that accuracy process, and we're going to come back to this again and again, we're going to keep talking about that accuracy process because this is a leverage point for you as an ENTP, is to begin studying and practicing what we call radical honesty. There is a book by Brad Blanton that actually is called Radical Honesty, and he lays out a framework for your life that you can adopt as an ENTP. You don't have to adopt it fully, but there are elements in there and some frameworks he talks about to show up to the world being radically honest with the people in your life. Now, this can be a challenge for you as an ENTP because when you show up radically honest, people are not used to others in the world being honest with them. A simple exercise is to go through your day and ask everybody you come in contact with, and you do this probably on a regular basis, how are you doing today? And most people say, I'm doing great, or I'm fine, I'm good. It's very rare you'll run into somebody that's radically honest with you saying, I'm actually having a terrible day. My kid just threw up on me this morning. My husband is about ready to leave me. I'm stressed. I just got in a car accident. Like last week, my car's in the shop and I've got credit card debt and I feel terrible and I just want to go home and watch soap operas and sleep. I don't know what else to do. Like I'm so depressed, I don't know what to do. Like nobody's going to tell you that during the day because we don't tell each other that kind of stuff. But somebody that's practicing radical honesty would tell somebody whatever's going on for them if it was appropriate context in a space that makes sense. Now, that's just a daily social level. What happens if you're talking to a boss or your spouse and you're having marital problems, or bringing radical honesty to that conversation can be very challenging for both of you, especially if you're not used to this in your life. So radical honesty is a leverage point for you as an ENTP.
I'm so glad you brought up the discipline of radical honesty because it's so easy to, as an ENTP, it's so easy to get in a habit of looking for approval from other people. And the reason why is the 10-year-old position that sits right behind the co-pilot in the car model, or what's technically called the tertiary in your cognitive function stack, is extroverted feeling, or what we've nicknamed harmony. And harmony is all about making connections with other people. It's all about understanding the social dynamics, the interplay between people, how we're impacting each other on an emotional level. And so connectivity becomes really important to harmony. And in fact, in the survey that we got back, and this is one of the answers we got back that I totally resonate with, ENTPs mentioned that they had a struggle with connection. In fact, just this last weekend, I ran into another ENTP woman, which is a very rare occurrence for me. And I asked her, what do you think is the biggest struggle that you've experienced throughout your life? And she said connectivity. She said, when I connect with people, I connect fast and it gets intimate really quick. But I connect with so few people. And I would agree with that. I would say that connectivity, true, authentic connectivity, has been a struggle. So an ENTP that doesn't have enough connections in their life, like that true feeling of connectivity, may start to become a bit of a people pleaser. Now, that might seem like a weird thing to say about ENTPs because they're not known to be people pleasers. And yet they can sometimes try to find the most acceptable way of speaking, going about things, beliefs, things that won't exactly, mess with the equilibrium of whatever social dynamic they're in order to maintain the connections that they have. What radical honesty does is it forces them out of thinking in terms of being socially acceptable to other people. It requires them to not just be thinking about other people's feelings, but actually what makes intellectual and analytical sense to them. And that means that they're going to ruffle a few feathers. In fact, when an ENTP, and I don't mean when an ENTP is a dick, okay? I'm not talking about when they're like being a jerk to somebody else. That's just them messing with somebody on a pure exploration level, which is never okay. But when they're being really honest with themselves, and what's great about the discipline of introverted thinking, the discipline of radical honesty, when they're using their introverted thinking or accuracy process, what's great about that is Brad Blanton mentions that radical honesty, quote unquote, starts at home. Like, as in, you are trying to root out your own cognitive biases. You're trying to figure out where you're lying to yourself. It's not just a matter of like always saying exactly what's happening in your day when somebody says, hey, how you doing? Like, you don't have to go through a laundry list of everything that's happened in your day. It's a discipline that teaches you to be honest with yourself first. And if you've been shining it on if you've been acting like everything's okay when it's not, and I mean about deep, profound things, belief systems, paradigms, a toxic relationship that you continue to agree with when you actually don't, your inner wisdom is telling you not to be agreeable in this relationship, to call it and say, no, it's not okay for you to treat me like that, or it's not okay for you to be toxic in this situation. I don't actually believe this belief system that everybody around me does, but if I say that, they're going to boot me from the tribe, quote unquote. Those are the levels of radical honesty that you need to get to as an ENTP. And when you can do that, what you'll find is that you are bringing your authentic self forward so that when you have connectivity, yeah, it might not be as often because you're not being as quote unquote as agreeable. But when you find somebody that connects with you, it goes intimate real quick. Like you have that super satisfying connection. And it does mean that you're going to be less acceptable to a larger group of people, but you'll have quality relationships, not just quantity of relationships. It's actually a very similar piece of advice that we gave to ENFJs. Focus on quality connections, quality intimacy over quantity. And for an ENTP, I mean, people don't know this about ENTPs, but they actually really do care about other people's feelings. Like if somebody's really mad at you, that impacts you as an ENTP. If you think your reputation's on the line, if you think a big group of people doesn't like you, that can be a struggle. It really can. And if people don't like you and you're receiving that feedback because you've legitimately done things that cause people not to like you, in like you've been acting like a dick, like we just mentioned, then that's feedback you should be getting and going, maybe I should calibrate to that. Maybe I should recognize that I'm not allowed to be, say, unkind to other people. I'm not allowed to be a jerk. However, if you are being kind, if you're coming from a place of true radical honesty, if you're coming from a place of actual accurate expression, right? Like not just messing with people or being a jerk, but actually like this is the kindness you bring to the world is by pointing out things that other people may have trouble accepting and people don't like you that much. If you fully develop and rest into the accuracy process, you'll be able to make peace with it. You'll be okay. You'll go, but this is what I'm here to say. And I'm sorry that it's not acceptable to you, but this is the thing you need to hear. And I don't just mean like you look fat in that dress. I'm not talking about that kind of stuff, that level of radical honesty. I'm talking about like, here are profound truths that people are ignoring on a huge, like, scalably bad way. Like, if everybody buys this, like things
Emperor's
like
New Clothes type stuff, right?
Exactly. Like, at what level do we make it not okay to be anti-science, right? And I'm saying this is my own personal radical honesty. Not everybody's okay with these positions that I have. Like, there's a lot of people, even our listeners, a lot of our listeners are people who might hold what I would call anti-science beliefs. And they might be right. I don't know. But it seems to be it doesn't seem to make sense to me at all. And so for me, I'm not okay when people take positions that I would call anti-science. Not simply like broadening the scope of what could be, right? Like accepting science and then going, yeah, but then there also might be more stuff out there. I mean, like definitively, like every piece of scientific evidence we get points this direction, and you are simply saying, well, my paradigm doesn't align to that, so I'm just not going to accept it, right? Like I'm just going to pretend like scientists all have an agenda or something. Like at what level do we go, it's not acceptable to be anti-science, and it's actually hurting us all to be that way? So that would be my radical honesty. Not acceptable. There's probably somebody right now who's offended by that, who's never going to listen to our podcast again. And yet that's my radical honesty, so I have to rest into it. That's part of my message. Is that me being a dick? I don't think so. I think that's me just saying my radical honesty. And when an ENTP rests into that, then they have the confidence to be able to show up in a way that might be unacceptable to somebody else, but they know it's not based on unkindness. It's based on the position of radical honesty, that what they're here to say. And then when they do when they form those connections with people, they know it's based on a foundation of truth, not a foundation of shining it on.
For your life as an ENTP, I know the answer to this, but what was one of those periods of time when you had to say, here's the radical honesty for me? It wasn't so much about showing other people what was the right, like what you thought was accurate for them. It was that, because it starts with you internally as an ENTP, right? Like you had to come to a point where you're like, I'm not going to lie to myself anymore. I refuse to play any social games, to any lying games to myself. I have to be rational and I've got to make sense to myself. And you had a period of time in your life this happened?
Totally. So I've mentioned it before in other podcasts. There was a time period, I grew up in a very strong religious paradigm. My parents are deeply religious. And I think I I spent the majority of my 20s trying to reconcile the fact that I didn't believe it anymore. Couldn't even acknowledge that initially. Couldn't acknowledge that I didn't believe it anymore. What I think the language I used was, well, maybe I don't fit here. Like, where's my place here? And I kept going on this spiritual journey, this religious journey of where do I fit in this paradigm, and is there a place for me? And then eventually it got to a point where I realized, no, I just don't believe it. But the consequences meant that because it is deeply religious and it's one of those paradigms that requires everybody to buy in, otherwise you are seen as dangerous, I knew that if I didn't buy it anymore, if I left, I was going to lose basically every connection I had. Every person that meant something to me because it was all connected to this paradigm, I was going to lose everybody. And so my radical honesty took years to get to. And when I got to that point where I said, I don't believe it anymore, I was right. My prediction was accurate. I pretty much lost everybody in my life.
And it was worth it to you. I mean, I'm genuinely asking this question. This is not a rhetorical question. Was it worth it to you to be radically honest with yourself, even though everybody you ever loved said, we don't want to have anything to do with you anymore? I mean, like, really, you lost everything for that. Is it worth it?
The pain of cognitive dissonance within myself was 10 times worse than the pain of my parents telling me that they no longer wanted to have a relationship with me. And so that may have been one of the biggest pain points of my entire life, was losing my closest relationships, losing my parents, losing my entire extended family beyond my parents. That may have been the most painful thing that I ever went through. And the reason why I did is because the pain of cognitive dissonance was greater than that.
What did you gain from that decision? Like, you got rid of a feeling of the icky feelings of cognitive dissonance, but what did you get as a result of really getting the accuracy process and saying, no, this is what makes sense to me as a person?
I gained myself. I got myself back. Cognitive dissonance was robbing me of who I was. And so what I got back was me. Like, I was able to be who I am now. I'm able to speak my truth. I'm able to speak my honesty, which I don't believe is empirical. I don't think my honesty is empirical. I don't think that I know empirical truth in all ways. In fact, I don't think I know anything empirically. And at the same time, I was able to get myself back. And there's a phrase that I heard one time that really struck with me, and that is, no matter where you go, there you are. So the one thing I couldn't get away from was my own fakeness. And I don't mean fake, like, I always showed up as me, like like the pillars of who I am. I always showed up like I'm not unrecognizable by any stretch of the imagination. I still show up, like, I enjoy the same stuff. Like the things that I was watching 15 years ago, I still watch them now. And the music I enjoyed then, I still enjoy now. So it's not like I went through such a massive, rehabilitation that I'm no longer recognizable from that other person. But what I didn't have before was the ability that when I saw something was wrong or struck me wrong, I didn't have the ability to point it out without fear. And now I have no fear. Like, I am able to point out whatever I want to point out. I am able to speak a truth that I was never able to speak before. And the consequences, like you really can't do anything to me at this point. Like, yeah, okay, you like, a person could take my life or, beat the hell out of me and put me in the hospital. Like, absolutely, there's definitely things that people could do to me that would be very undesirable for sure. But on a mimetic level, on a psychological level, like, you really can't do anything to a person that's worse than removing every loved one from their life. Like, that's pretty much as low as it gets.
The worst has happened for you then in that.
The worst has happened. So at this point, there's really nothing I fear saying. And because of that, there is this extraordinary freedom I have. There's no prisons. I feel no mimetic prisons anymore. And yeah, I still want to approach people, meet them where they're at, speak things with kindness. I want to not, I don't really feel any need to, slap other people in the face with harsh truths. Like, I don't really feel that that's effective. I want to continue to be a kind person. I think that's one of the gifts that that Harmony 10-year-old really provides and gives to me, is the desire to be kind. But I have no fear. Like I'll tell anybody anything that I think needs to be said. And so I gained me back. That's what I gained. What I gained was that ability to be out of a mental prison, which was simply unacceptable to me before.
You know, when you talk about how you're not much different now than you were then, as far as like how you show up to the world, like your accuracy process has always been a part of you. You've always thought in terms of what makes sense to me, but the word that you used earlier, and I want to highlight this because I think this could be glossed over for you as an ENTP listening. Antonia used the word discipline, and she referenced it according to the accuracy process, her co-pilot or her auxiliary function, her cognitive function. And the reason why I say I highlight that word discipline, and discipline, gets a bad rap here sometimes when we think about discipline, like doing things you don't want to do sometimes, like disciplining yourself to do things. But what she's talking about is the difference between skill and talent. She had a natural talent for being able to see what's accurate, what makes sense for her. But she had never, I'm guessing that when you started to really focus on the discipline of that secondary process, that co-pilot process, you started to really focus on, okay, I already have a natural talent for this, but I need to actually work on this. I need to spend time really thinking about the discipline of radical honesty, the discipline of speaking my internal accurate truth and not give people what they want to hear, not try to candy coat it for anyone, but speak that and just speak it in a very unemotional place. And disciplining yourself to do that led you to those decisions, but that discipline was what was key. And I don't think it's a matter of just making internal sense for yourself as an ENTP. I think it's really focusing in a disciplined way on that accuracy process.
The other thing that I did at that time was I started studying formal logic. And formal logic has been as great a tool for me as radical honesty. Radical honesty got me to a place where I could accept the changes I needed to make in my life. Formal logic helped me develop an ability to focus and really know what I wanted to be studying as my science of choice. Now, I use the word science loosely because it's hard to see personality psychology and models of human development as a hard science, which I don't really think it is. I think it's more of a philosophy. But it's my science of choice. I use science in the same way that a lot of, authenticity people might use the word art. It's my science of choice. And the more I studied formal logic, the better I got at being able to understand concepts on a very surgical level. Like when somebody gives me a piece of information, or they give, like maybe they're in an argument or they're trying to understand something, one of the gifts that I think all NTPs have, really, and if they build the skill, they can get, they just get world class at this. They have the ability to see like the difference between two concepts that the other person may have conflated. They understand how those two things are actually separate. They bring a surgical component to thoughts, ideas, and concepts. The better you get at disciplines or schools of thought like formal logic and math. This is probably one of the reasons why we talk about math so much with NTPs. I'm not into math. When I talk about NTPs being into math, I use it in sort of a gross sort of language of the digital. It doesn't have to be math. I don't dig math personally, but I do love formal logic, and I love those disciplines like that. And what you do when you bring that digital component is you bring the ability to understand what other people have gotten hazy. And so the more I dug into that for myself, the more I was able to understand where I had conflated things, like maybe I wanted to do something, but I had a limiting belief around it that had nothing to do with my desire. But for some reason, that whole neurons that fire together, wire together, somehow they had gotten wired together at some point in my life. And I was able to go, I actually think that those are two different things. Like my fear around this has nothing to do with this. It has to do with something else that my brain just made a connection with. And so I got really clear on what it was I brought to the world. I got really clear on what I wanted to do. I got really clear on the concepts around it. My data started to get much better. Like I got much clearer in my articulation, in my coaching, in my writing, in podcasts. I became a much better interpreter of my thoughts. And so I cannot express with any more passion how important it is for ENTPs to develop that co-pilot of accuracy. We say this all the time with all of the types. It's the sweet spot of personal development. It is your leverage point. And maybe this podcast needed me to bring the personal element into it in order to really express a personal story of how powerful this can be. No matter what type you are, you as the listener, I cannot express enough how important it is and how powerful it is to develop that co-pilot. There's so much about you that lives there and really needs to be discovered and really needs to be honed in order to figure out what it is that you bring to the planet, what it is you bring to the world. Even if that's not playing a big game and you don't want to like change the world in any specific, your statue ends up in the middle of the city sort of way. It doesn't have to look like that, but who you are and what you bring, so much undiscovered territory is in that co-pilot. And I know that because I first observed it in myself, and then I started going, I wonder if this is how it works for other people. And then I just saw the pattern happening over and over and over again. So that radical honesty, disciplines like formal logic, math, if that's what you happen to be into, you don't have to be, but if that's what you happen to be into, but whatever it is, the ability to clean slice information and go real digital, that's a major part of your gift. And who you are and what you want to bring to the world, especially as an ENTP, most likely will be found there. Now, I say that as somebody who also has the philosophy that we are serially monogamous with the things we want to do in life, our passions. One of the things we do is we overwhelm ourselves with this idea of like, I have to find like the one thing I want to be doing in life. The more I got into formal logic, the more I understood that I think just like we're serially monogamous with our relationships throughout life, we're serially monogamous with our passions throughout life. So I'm not going to be doing personality hacker forever. I'm totally fine with that. And I know that this is a thing I should be focused on. And that was another thing I saw come up over and over again in the survey is trouble with focus. Like I love doing so many things. I want my fingers in a lot of different pies. I want to be doing so many different styles of things. And unfortunately, what happens with ENPs, and I think we even mentioned this on the ENFP podcast, is that if you can't decide what you want to do amongst 100 things, if you can't choose just one, then you actually will choose 0. Like choosing one is better than not choosing at all, because not choosing at all means that you're unconsciously choosing to do none of them. So that became really clear to me. And I went, well, I got to choose something. And this is something I'm really into. And I keep being interested in it. So I think I'm going to keep going down this road. And then I'll just keep going down the road until it ends. And then I'll jump onto whatever's the next train. And I think for ENTPs, when you have trouble with focus, it usually means that you fear getting trapped into one, you're on rails now. You've got one line of sight and that's it. And you're trapped. And I would argue that that's less of a trap than choosing nothing. The real trap is not allowing yourself any focus and choosing nothing and then not truly not making any traction. So again, that co-pilot process seems to be just so powerful for all types, but we're talking about ENTPs right now. And if you want an anecdotal experience as evidence, not that that's real evidence by any stretch of the imagination, but it can be compelling, then my story is evidence of that playing out.
So as you're talking about this, like I want to talk about this accuracy process just a little bit more before we get to the very final piece of your car model as an ENTP. And I want to ask you a question about this, or at least have a little quick conversation about this. When I look at my co-pilot of authenticity, one of the challenges there is I don't want to be seen as insincere. Like insincerity is very important. Like I don't come across insincere to people. And one of my challenges in working on my authenticity is sometimes as I'm working on it, I might look foolish or look insincere or something of this nature when I don't mean to be. And so I prevent myself from working on it because it brings up vulnerabilities for me. As an ENTP, my view of this is that competency is very important for you as an ENTP. Being competent in what you do with your accuracy process. So you've learned things in your life up till now that you're very competent at. And in order to grow your accuracy process, that introverted thinking part of you, you're going to have a beginner's mind and not be as competent when you're starting down this road of building these disciplines of radical honesty, of building the discipline of getting into that accuracy process and asking yourself what makes actual logical sense. So let's just have a quick conversation to the ENTP listening that is fearing feeling that feeling of looking foolish because they have to go and start over again in some things they might not be as competent about, the vulnerability there. How have you seen other ENTPs? I know this is turning a little more interviewee because you're the ENTP in the group here. But what do you think you could say, or what could we both say to an ENTP that's looking at that accuracy process, resisting that? I don't want to look foolish. I don't want to look like I'm incompetent at this.
Well, a part of me recognizes that there probably are ENTPs with pretty big egos that don't want to look incompetent to other people. Actually, no, I know that for a fact, because when I was younger, I can definitely put myself in that position of always wanting to seem like I had it together. Like I was the know-it-all teacher who always knew the answer. Somebody would give me a piece of information, and even if I had never actually read or studied that anywhere, it would already sound familiar to me, so I'd act like I already knew that, even if I didn't. So I think that there definitely is ego around wanting to be smart, competent, and capable. I think for me, what ended up happening was I learned two things. First of all, I think ENTPs are actually pretty okay at jumping into a skill. Like, if you tell them that they need to develop something, of all the types, I think one of the things that ENTPs really shine at is the ability to just jump in and go, oh, okay, I need to go do that. Okay, I'll go do it. They don't fear discomfort nearly as much as the other types. They do fear being seen foolish, though, or incompetent, like you mentioned. So it depends on the kind of skill we're talking about. Are we talking about the kind of skill where the ENTP needs to be uncomfortable in order to develop it? I think they're fine there. But if we're talking about the kind of skill that they need to develop, which might make them seem incompetent in the beginning,
or look stupid maybe in front of other people.
Right. Have to take that beginner's mind, have to take that student role. Something that helped me out a lot was understanding the concept of modesty. Now, we probably have mentioned this in a previous podcast. I don't remember which one. But modesty is different than humility. And I think we tend to conflate these two concepts a lot. And I also think that we use modesty in kind of in a, an old style parochial context. Like modesty seems to be like the way that I was always taught the concept of modesty was like modesty of dress. Like you don't want to like be showing too much cleavage as a woman or something. But modesty is actually not what it really is it's understanding your limitations. And now humility could be more seen as like you don't think you're better than anybody else. A humble person doesn't think they're better than anybody else. But modesty has no relationship to that. It has to do with really getting a grasp of your internal metrics. Modesty is understanding when you have a limitation, but it also means that you have to recognize when you don't have a limitation. Like when you're good at something, you get to acknowledge that. A lot of times people have false humility in that if somebody goes, are you really good at that? They'll go, oh, no, I'm okay, right? And so I think that's why we tend to conflate those two concepts is that we become falsely immodest in order to maintain humility. And I think that that's actually all just wrapped up in ego anyway. And so whenever anybody behaves that way, I know that this is actually a source of ego for them.
I have to pause you just for a moment.
Yeah.
I want you listening, I want you to pay attention to what Antonia just did. She just used her accuracy process to clean slice two concepts that people conflate. This is exactly what she was talking about earlier. That accuracy can do is this idea between modesty and humility. Most people conflate those two. And she just clean sliced them into two very different things and illustrated them for us here, which I think is the power that accuracy brings to the table. This is totally about something we talked about earlier, but I just wanted to use this as an illustration of what we were referring to earlier about the ability to clean slice concepts in your mind.
Yeah. Yeah, it's an ENTP superpower if they choose to accept it. INTPs get to do this really well too. I think all the TP types are pretty good at this, but when you combine the accuracy process with exploration or pattern recognition, I think you're willing to use this in a more abstract setting than maybe STPs are. I think they do the same thing, but they do it a little differently. So thank you for pointing that out, actually. I appreciate you pointing out an example of what I was referring to earlier. So back to the topic.
Absolutely.
All right. So back to the topic. The idea that you don't have to be falsely immodest means that you can accept compliments so much better. And it also means that when you have an area where you don't have expertise, where you might be more incompetent, you might be more of a beginner, you're not as threatened by that because you didn't, falsely, immodestly accept an undervaluing of something you were good at. So you don't have to falsely inflate something you're poor at. you're not trying to compensate for when you didn't accept the compliment.
Yeah.
Because you accepted the compliment and said, yeah, I'm kind of badass at that, aren't I? So when you have to get into a beginner's mind, you already have the confidence you've rested into because you were honest about it. You were radically honest the whole time. And so now it's just a matter of that I'm just not good at that.
That's my truth right now.
That's my truth. That's radically honest. I'm kind of shitty at that. So I need to get better, or I don't care about that. We were actually having a conversation. I'm just totally tangenting now. I don't think that we're at all on a predictable blueprint of how we've done previous podcasts. And maybe that's why we kept ENTP for last, because we knew we were going to do this. But we just had a conversation about the difference between respect and approval. And I realized I would much rather have somebody's approval than their respect. And I think it's because if I don't have somebody's respect, it's either because I don't deserve their respect, like the thing they're talking about, I'm actually not an authority or an expert or good at, and why should they respect me if I'm not? Or if I am good at that and an expert and I should have their respect and they don't give it to me, that's their stuff. That's their inability to see that about me. But approval means connection and love. So I'd much rather have approval and connection and love, because that's something that's a lot more difficult for me to reach at, to get at. That's way more difficult for me to really authentically produce on my own. And that's something that's very desirable for me, is connection. So I think with an ENTP, if they're really struggling with this idea of being willing to put themselves in an area where they have to develop a discipline at a beginner's level or at the student role, I think that means that they probably have not allowed themselves to feel the full effect of where they're really good and rest into that and accept that about themselves and have radical honesty within themselves that they're actually pretty kick-ass in other stuff, in other areas. And so bring that confidence to the table when they're starting to develop a skill that they're not so good at. And so they know that this is not a sign of them being a bad person or them being unacceptable or them not being valuable, that it's just this particular context is not where they shine yet. I want to say one more thing on this relationship between accuracy and harmony. I know that we're probably pretty far into this podcast and we probably have to wrap it up pretty soon. But one thing that I've really noticed, especially women who are ENTPs, I think men who are ENTPs probably feel this as well, but they're not as encouraged to go to their feeler process of harmony or extroverted feeling as much as women are, because the majority of women, or 50% of women, use extroverted feeling or harmony. So ENTP women...
As a strength.
As a driver co-pilot. Thank you. And so I think ENTP women get really encouraged to go to that space. And what ends up happening, I think, a lot of times is that they get an idea, or they pattern recognize quickly what societal expectations are, and then they imprint it inside of themselves of how they're supposed to show up in order to be acceptable. And they're usually wrong. My observation has been, I think this was the source of, I don't know if you, the listener, know this about me. I don't know if I've really shared much of this in previous podcasts, but I say suffer from, I think that's a very dramatic term, but I dealt with body dysmorphic disorder for a really long time. I think I have mentioned this in previous podcasts.
Yeah, you did.
Yeah, and body dysmorphic disorder is basically this belief that you're too ugly to be loved, which is a truly ridiculous statement. It's a ridiculous belief. It has no basis in any sort of reason or analysis. It definitely doesn't pass accuracy muster, for sure. And it was because when I was really young, I imprinted society's concept of beauty, and I just kind of accepted that. I thought, oh, I'm supposed to look like what you look like on magazines. Now, I know that this is not just particular to ENTPs. Anybody at any point can develop body dysmorphic disorder for any sort of reason. But this has carried out to my observation of other ENTP women, that they'll get a concept of how they're supposed to be based on societal, concepts. It might have nothing to do with the way they look. It might have to do with how they show up and whether or not they're acceptable or unacceptable, or whether or not they're masculine or feminine, or whatever it is. And I think that's one of the other things that accuracy really does for an ENTP, regardless of whether or not they're a woman or a man. But if they've integrated some sort of unspoken social contract young that they think is true, like they've just accepted it as a truth, what accuracy does is it questions the self. It goes, why is that true? How much evidence do you have for that to be true? Now, for me, I felt like I had a ton of evidence around me that it was true that you had to look like a magazine cover in order to be acceptable or loved. Until I started to look around me and go, the overwhelming majority of human beings don't look like that. And the overwhelming majority of human beings mate and have children and seem to be fine. Like, you don't have to look like a magazine cover in order to be able to mate and have a relationship and have, be qualified to have sex and be qualified to be sexy and be qualified to have somebody want to have sex with you or want to have a relationship with you and procreate with you. So that's the other thing that accuracy does for any ENTP is if you have imprinted any sort of just completely ass backward societal expectation on yourself, it allows you to take a sword to that and go, really? Is that what we're going to think? Is that how we're going to roll? Or are you going to go ahead and reevaluate that? And accuracy was my way out of body dysmorphic disorder. I got to a point where my accuracy just thought it was unacceptable to believe it anymore, just like it thought it was unacceptable to believe my religious paradigm of the past anymore. So there's a lot of ways in which accuracy can be an ENTP's salvation.
Let's shift gears and talk about that final process in the CAR model. It's the inferior function in your cognitive function stack. In the CAR model, we call this your 3-year-old process. The technical name is introverted sensing. We've nicknamed it memory. Memory really shows up for you in 2 ways as an ENTP. The first way is in a bad way, a negative way, potentially. It can flare up and cause problems for you. We go into a lot more detail about how this looks in our personal development starter kit. So I'm not going to belabor that now because we're running out of time and really wanted to focus on that secondary co-pilot process in this podcast because that's the leverage point. The other way it can show up for you as an ENTP is wanting to impact the status quo or wanting to impact the infrastructure around you. It can show up as an aspirational element of your personality, something that you aspire to. And again, we talk more about that in other materials around ENTP, but just anchor both those things in your mind. It can show up sometimes in a negative way when you're just not yourself and it only happens rarely and you're like, wow, what just happened there? I don't feel myself at all. Or it can inspire you into an aspirational element of wanting to change things in the world, the infrastructural world as an ENTP.
Yeah, most of the time when it shows up in a negative way, you can handle that just by go ahead and revisiting the past. Go ahead and revisiting memories in more of a nostalgic way. Music from when you were a teenager, or movies that you really enjoy watching over and over again, or just getting into a very familiar place. The aspirational piece, though, is really interesting because I've noticed that for ENTPs, they generally do want to make an impact on the world. It's very rare for an ENTP to not want to actually play a bigger game. That's very common. And usually they want to be disruptive in some way. They want to disrupt the status quo. And that's very much a way that memory 3-year-old shows up as an aspiration. So if you have a desire to be disruptive, if you have a desire to, I don't know, like blaze to the ground some sort of institution that you think is corrupt or wrong or bad, just know that that's actually pretty common to ENTPs. And one of the best ways to do that is to be as much in your genius as possible, bringing your best self forward, really being able to focus and figure out the thing you want to be doing in life, your passion, even if it's just serially monogamous passion, but figuring out what you want to be doing and bringing your best self forward. And then in that way, you will be disruptive in the best way possible.
So we have more information and resources on our website, personalityhacker.com, where we can dive into ENTP, all the other personality types. We don't talk about personality types for their own sake, though. The real heart and soul of what we do here at Personality Hacker is we are focused on personal growth. Our own personal growth as leadership here in this company, the people that work with us, and you listening, we want you to grow as a person. And we believe that one of the best leverage points, one of the lenses you can look through to architect and construct a personal growth journey that will just send you into the stratosphere is by looking at your personality type first, to realize that not all personal growth development journeys are going to be the same. Not all are created equal. What works for you as an ENTP may not work for somebody as an INTJ or an ENTJ or an INFP or whatever. It's very unique to you, and we really firmly believe that. So we invite you to come over to the website, read the articles and resources that we're putting out on a consistent basis there, and also tie into the community. Tie in with other people of like minds, just like yourself. Over at facebook.com/personality hacker is one place to do that. We also have a Twitter feed, twitter.com/personality hack. And be a part of the community. Make your voice heard, ask questions, enter in discussion. We want you to be a part of this. We need all of the personality types represented in the world. And all of us need to have each other's back in this growth process because we can learn so much from each other as we do this. So I invite you to come over and be a part of that with us.
Yeah, we've also started a new community called Intuitive Awakening. If you go to Facebook and to the Intuitive Awakening page, it's a pinned post at the top that will give you a link to that closed group. It just takes usually we approve people within a couple hours, and then you can start being a part of that community, which is all around personal development, all around, being intuitive or intuitive friendly. You don't have to be an intuitive, but if you're intuitive friendly, we invite you as well. And that's a great way to talk about your personal development journey, the things you're working on, getting great ideas from other people who are similar personality types and of like minds. And it's so far been a really great community. Like, I'm actually pretty impressed with the quality of people who are on there and the quality of discussions we're having.
Absolutely. That's facebook.com/intuitive awakening is how you find that.
Right. And also you can subscribe to us on iTunes. If you subscribe to us on iTunes, you can also leave a rating and review. Actually, you can leave a rating and review even if you don't subscribe to us on iTunes.
But you better subscribe.
Yeah, but we'd prefer if you subscribed. And the reason why we love it when people leave a rating and review is that it seems that iTunes will give precedent to people, or preference actually. They'll give preference to people who have a lot of rating and reviews, and then they'll push out your podcast to other people. Like, they'll recommend it on their front page and they'll rate you high, and then you get a lot more traction. So if you're in a spirit of reciprocity mood, it would be really lovely if you would go to iTunes and leave a rating and review. And you can also subscribe to us on various Android platforms. In fact, I believe we just recently rolled out a link on the Facebook page that gives you a very easy access to an Android platform in which to subscribe to us. So we recommend doing that as well.
We actually have a Personality Hacker app on the Android platform. So you can actually listen to the podcast right on our Personality Hacker app. It's free. And if you just search the Android store, the Google Play Store, whatever it's called, I don't have Android stuff, but you can download it. And several friends of mine have downloaded it on their Android devices. You can be a part of the community and part right of the podcast each week right on your Android platform through the actual Personality Hacker app, which is great. My name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
And we can't wait to talk with you on the next Personality Hacker podcast.